Hello and welcome to An Abundance of Books. Today we're going to be talking about everybody's favorite topic, me. I'm here to bring you the top 10 things that I love in books. Some of these are tropes, some of these are like item-based, some of them are more like themes. It's a weird list. I've been slowly adding to it over a couple months every time something comes to me. And it's a very eclectic list, spanning lots of genres. This is also just a plea for recommendations from you. If you have anything that falls into one of these categories, I would love to hear about it. A lot of these aren't necessarily guaranteed to make me love the book. A lot of the time they're just guarantees to make me pick it up, but I will take it either way. Also, I'm sitting in a chair this time and the angle's good and everything's good. I'm gonna have to do this more often. The first one we're starting out with is something I was just talking about with my husband like 2 days ago. And I can't remember what we were watching, but I was like, this is one of the tropes that I absolutely love. It's not gonna come to me, I bet, but just trust me. It is the idea of someone learning a basic skill. The first example that I have of this is The Bookseller by Cynthia Nixon? That can't be right. Swanson. And it features a bookseller who is teaching a young boy how to read. And just the idea of learning something new like that for the first time, it just gets me in my feels. I'm going to have 2 examples for all of these and try to stick to only 2. The other one is The Deep by River Solomon. My favorite part being when the mer people start to develop their own language and their own way of communicating. A lot of it is through like vibrations in the waves and stuff too. It's very interesting to me, but I love it in all the forms. I'm thinking of, this wasn't the example I was talking about with my husband, but we're rewatching The Good Place and Janet is learning everything for the first time again, and it's in a comedic way, but that still works for me. So yeah, part of it is learning to read or communicate, but just any basic skill I think would work for me. My next exceedingly specific example is glass houses. Something about them freaks me out, but also endears me to them. I think my perfect example of this, and possibly one of the perfect books, is The Turn of the Key by Ruth, Ware. This features a house that's half gothic castle that's crumbling and half glass smart home, and it's very cool. There's also The Glass House by Cynthia Swanson again. That book I didn't love as much, but I have a very clear picture of the book in my head, which I think is from The Glass House. I can picture the whole scenery so clearly, even though it's been a couple of years since I read it. That one's a huge one. That's one of the first ones I came up with, so please give me your recommendations for that one. Just the aesthetic, oh, it's just great. Next up is kind of a weird one. It is fiction that reads like nonfiction and nonfiction that reads like fiction. Just something about subverting the way that your story is told and making it either feel more based in the real world or more fantastical and emotional. It's just something very interesting to me. It's like genre bending, but not. I have 2 examples for each, don't be mad. First is Daisy Jones and the Six. This is fiction that absolutely reads like nonfiction. There were multiple people who thought that Daisy Jones was a real man because they reference real life events around them. And we were all a little bit bummed that they weren't real. And then also a book I'm currently reading, Everything I Never Told You by Celeste. This is doing a really interesting job of juxtaposing the characters' lives with real life events. It makes it feel like the characters are real and this is more of a biography than it just straight fiction. And then the other way, there's The Feather Thief, which is a story about a real life heist of a bunch of feathers. And it was absolutely fascinating, but it reads so smoothly. I think maybe calling it fiction isn't quite right, but having a very strong narrative is what I enjoy. Dead Mountain is my other example of this. It's the story about a bunch of hikers who went missing and died under very mysterious circumstances many years ago, and about a journalist trying to figure out the truth, interviewing a bunch of people, but it sort of reads like a movie or a documentary. It's extremely compelling. My next example is very fun. It is one of my favorite things. It's very gimmicky. It really doesn't have anything to do with the story, but I love it. And it is When the Book is the Book. That didn't make any sense. I don't know how to explain it in a way that will make sense, but I'll give it a go. In Instructions for Dancing by Nicola Yoon, the character finds a book called Instructions for Dancing. In People We Meet on Vacation, the character ends up writing a book called People We Meet on Vacation. House of Leaves, they end up finding or creating a book called House of Leaves, and my personal favorite, though I don't remember which one, either Inheart or Neverending Story is the book. Like, they talk about a character reading the book, but it's the book that you're reading. And I remember that one so specifically because there are parts that are written in like different colored ink and it means something. I have to figure out which one it was because I was absolutely obsessed with it when I was a kid. I think it's Inheart. If I had to put money, I think it's Inheart, but I should probably read both just to be safe. But yeah, just the idea that this object that you're holding has some kind of significance in the story or like power, and it's spooky. House of Leaves especially was spooky because you're like, oh, I'm holding a cursed object. Excellent. I just think it's really cool and it messes with my brain and I love it. Next up is a theme. I love books that are about death and morality. Death personified is one of my favorite things. Under the Whispering Door by T.J. Klune features a Grim Reaper just as a character, which is very fun. And my other example is Scythe. This is a sci-fi future where there are Scythes elected who will kill off the population because they don't die of natural causes anymore. And that one is super good, especially for the discussions of morality or like what a good death is. How do you decide who's going to die when it's literally in your hands? Super interesting stuff. I'm always interested in the conversation when it happens. Next is a romance trope. I figured I should put one of those in there because, as we all know, the romance girlies have very specific feelings about very specific tropes. Though I think I just made my trope up because I'm calling it The One That Got Away. It's like Friends to Lovers, but not. The examples that I have are a lot like Adios and actually, I can pick this one up. Count Your Lucky Stars by Alexandria Bellefleur. This is about, actually both of them are about two high school friends who kissed one time and reconnect in their adulthood. Which I love because they didn't stay friends for the whole time. That is my issue with Friends to Lovers, is that it feels manipulative, like you're not actually friends with the person, you're just trying to get in their pants the whole time. Don't love that. If there's a real word for it, I would love it, but I'm calling it The One That Got Away, like you figure it out later and like, oh, it's just something that super works for me. Also, highly recommend both of those books. Almost all of the books that I'm talking about, I highly recommend. Next is something that I actually mentioned in my best books of the year. I went back to rewatch it because I couldn't remember which books I mentioned. But it's cults. I just love the cult trope, anything to do with cults, even slightly tangentially cults, like you don't have to call it a cult, but we all know it's a cult. The Project by Courtney Summers, I loved. It's very clearly about a cult and very interested in the language of cults and how people go about defining what a cult is and how cults can skirt around that issue a little bit. But I also have Yes Daddy by Jonathan Parks-Ramage, which I don't think, it's not a cult, but I do think the bite model sort of applies to it. It's just, I don't know, charismatic leader, isolation from your family. It's got a lot of the parts, but not necessarily all of them, but it still really works for me. I'm trying to think of why I enjoyed them so much, but I think it's because of the character study that you can do with it, examining both members, outsiders, and leaders. There's a lot of really interesting psychology in there, but it also almost always can lend itself to a thriller. There's always a sinister underbelly, and it's fun to figure out what that is. In fiction. In nonfiction, maybe less fun. And then my last three I realized are all sort of sci-fi tropes. I debated putting on the list that I just love a concept. I will pick up something, especially in the sci-fi realm, for the concept, if it's something I haven't really seen before. But these are three specific tropes, themes, whatever, that are broad enough that they could lend themselves to really interesting concepts on their own. First is anything robot, AI, non-humans learning how to be human. Aliens sometimes, but it's more about the learning aspect. Does this just relate to my first point? Maybe. Examples are Illuminate by J. Kristoff and Amy Kaufman. I feel like I switched their names. Did I? Part of this features the ship's AI is called Aiden, and it sort of gains sentience at a certain point. And then there's really fun conversations in there about, like, you know, value of human life, sort of. When you're an AI, nothing really matters. You figure out problems mathematically rather than emotionally sometimes. Another example is A Closed and Common Orbit, the second in the Wayfarer series. This one more heavily features Lovelace from the first one, who is also the ship's AI, but in this one she gets a body. And there's some really interesting stuff about adjusting to the real world, discovering senses, all that sort of fun stuff. Then my second to last trope, don't worry, we're getting there, is time travel. Although more broadly, like portal stuff, alternate dimensions also counts. Pure time travel is definitely my favorite, but I'll take what I can get. One Day All This Will Be Yours by Adrian Tchaikovsky was one of my favorite books of last year, and it's time travel that doesn't take itself too seriously. It's very silly. It features the causality wars, which are time travel wars, which is such a fun concept, and it executes it perfectly. I just think there's so many ways, so many avenues you could go down with a story like that. And I think, especially with this book, the tone of it made it so that you didn't have to buy into the concept completely, because time travel at a certain point does fall apart. You end up with paradoxes on paradoxes, but I can overlook that. Neverending Wake by Marisha Pessl was also one of my best books of last year, and it is a Groundhog Day scenario, which is time travel at its purest, I would say. It's just one day, you just do it over and over, although I think they only have 18 hours. They have slightly less than a day, I know. And I just love it. I love the idea of the repetition, of slowly falling into madness, of like, what can you learn from it? It's just very cool. Also, anything by Blake Crouch I think also falls into this category. And then finally, we have stuff having to do with memory. And I don't like sad memory books. Like, I don't like books about Alzheimer's or dementia or anything. But if it can be used in a genre book, then that's where I enjoy it. Before I Go to Sleep is one that I'm thinking of. This is like real world domestic thriller, but because it's a thriller, it doesn't get sad. It's about a woman who wakes up every day forgetting the day before, and she sometimes writes notes to herself that she sticks on, or she finds a journal that she's hidden. Maybe there are people in her life that she shouldn't trust. It's excellent. And I love that in a genre for the confusion. Like, if you're in the character's head, then you are feeling everything that they're feeling and solving the mystery along with them. I think it's a really cool idea. Though my second example is in a very different vein. The Giver by Lois Lowry is about a utopian, dystopian, what's the difference, society where one person holds on to the town's memories, and this new character, what's his name? I want to say Jacob, is tasked with being the new holder of all the memories, and he gets to learn about all the things that society has forgotten, why they're forgetting them, what the value is in remembering or forgetting. It's just so fun. Also, one of my most anticipated reads, Insomnia, comes out this month, and it's all about memory. So there you go. Those are the top 10 things that I love in books. Thank you for joining me, and let me know if you enjoy any of these things too, and of course if you have any recommendations. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope that you enjoyed, and I will see you very soon in another video. Bye!